How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about Steam hardware. I hope you are having a great week playing a ton of video games. The main topic in today's video is that it's becoming increasingly clear that Valve was really smart to pick mid-range for the spec sheet on the Steam machine. And for the quick wrap-up news story, since Resident Evil Requiem is right around the corner and I'm a die-hard fan of Resident Evil, like I've played 99% of the games in the entire series, I figured I'd tell you which ones I think you should play before it comes out and how to get them up and running perfectly on the Steam Deck. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. For this video, Squarespace asked me to highlight their new feature, Design Intelligence. It takes over 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise and combines it with cutting-edge AI tech to make it super easy for you to create an awesome website that looks amazing. Getting your website off the ground is dead simple with Squarespace because they have amazing templates. You start with a professionally designed template that's built to be customized for any type of website. Then you customize the look of it, you add your content, you move things around, you do whatever you want to tailor it specifically to your actual needs. And then when you want to take the design up another level, they've got awesome visual design tools. Their goal is to help you create a website that feels elevated without you having to spend a ton of time figuring out how to do it. They've got dozens of modern and intuitive options that fit every brand, industry, and purpose. So anything you want to do, you can do it. So when you're ready to build your website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/deckready to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, huge shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But with the intro out of the way, let's get into the main topic of today's video and talk about why Valve was super smart to pick mid-range for the spec sheet on the Steam machine. So when I was going through news articles to figure out what I wanted to talk about in today's video, I noticed 2 trends popping up over and over again. And it's that a lot of developers are basically being forced to target mid-range whether they like it or not. On the PC side, Nvidia is really helping things along. We've heard all these news stories about them taking the 5090 and other high-end GPUs essentially off the market and diverting them over to AI data centers because they need those parts and they can charge way more to them than they charge consumers. And the ones that do make it to store shelves sell out immediately and end up in the scalper market or get their prices increased as well. Like prices on GPUs are going through the roof and the high end is really becoming a situation where the cards are nowhere to be seen. And then you've got the situation where RAM is in real short supply right now and really expensive because one of the companies that made RAM was like, oh, we're just going to make it for AI data centers because we can charge them whatever we want. And then the companies that are sticking around in the consumer space are also selling to AI data centers on the side. So there's a huge shortage of RAM in the consumer space, but they're also increasing the prices across the board because they can't say OpenAI or Nvidia, we're going to charge you 3 times the price for RAM and then let consumers pay a third of that. No, they're going to raise the price on everyone because generally speaking, people will pay it. If people want to build a PC or buy a PC because the manufacturers who make pre-builds and laptops, they've got to pay the same prices, they're going to pay it. They're just going to be hating the entire experience from top to bottom. So prices are going up there. And now, even though we're already overpaying for GPUs and RAM, the situation has also spread to SSDs. SSDs are expected to double in price by the end of this year because they also need SSD tech for data centers as well. Like basically any PC component is going to get a price increase over the next year or so, and there's really nothing we can do about it. And since, you know, every government seems to be really into AI right now because it's pumping up the stock market so much, it's not like the government's going to step in and be like, whoa, we've got to figure out this situation because consumers are upset, AI data centers are upset because they're overpaying and not really producing anything that makes money, and it's just a bad situation overall. The stock market continues to go up, so as far as I can tell, nothing's really going to be done about this situation. So traditionally, when PC parts were expensive or pre-built PCs were really expensive, that's where consoles came in, right? They were lower spec, which meant lower price, but that's not really working out all that well anymore because of where consoles have been going over the past couple of generations and just the simple fact that they need the same parts as PCs these days. Because before, consoles were really custom, right? PlayStations were really different from Nintendos, which were really different from Xboxes. You were getting like a very boutique experience depending on which device you were playing on. one. Back in the day, Resident Evil 4 looked the best on GameCube and played the best on GameCube. We didn't get the great separate ways. We got Operation Ada, which really sucked, but you got better graphics, better atmosphere, and generally speaking, a much better experience overall playing Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube because it was tailor-made for that hardware. So when it was ported over to PS2 and PC, both of those ports had major issues you had to contend with. It wasn't like today where you have to really pixel peep to tell any difference between a game played on the Xbox Series X and a game played on the PlayStation 5. And even to some extent, the Nintendo Switch 2, like the graphics are toned down on the Switch 2, but effectively you're getting the exact same game across all three consoles. And the reason for that is that they're all just essentially PCs. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a little bit different because it's using a mobile phone chip at the end of the day, but it's still an NVIDIA made chip that has DLSS and all the other technology that's on PC, and porting to it is apparently a lot easier than it was porting over to the Switch 1 back in the day, like 5 or 10 years ago. Like the Switch 1 is not that old. I don't know why I said back in the day. So because of all of that, it's totally changing PlayStation's plans. Like initially they wanted to release the PlayStation 6 in 2027. That's what they've been building up to. They've been working on their PSSR upscaler on the PS5 Pro to have it ready for the PlayStation 6. Allegedly, they've been telling developers like, hey, get ready for the PS6. But because of all these shortages and everything else I just talked about, they're like, I think we're going to keep the PS5 around a little bit longer and extend its life cycle, which is honestly not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, because even if they release the PlayStation 6 in 2027, console generations have completely changed where you don't immediately see the shift to the next generation. The PS4 to PS5 generation completely changed that. We're up until like this year, really, if we're being honest. If a game came out on PlayStation 5, you could make a pretty safe bet, like 70-30 odds, I would say, that if you didn't see a PS4 port of a PS5 game at launch, you would see it within the next year. Like the longest we had to wait for a PS4 port, I would say, would be Jedi Survivor. That one took a couple of years, but that really came down to the fact that they released that game in a completely broken state on PC and even to some extent PS5. Like even the 30 FPS mode dropped frames into the low 20s all the time, and they had to really work hard to patch that game over a couple of years. And then magically, when they finished it and got it optimized, they were like, hey, we can release this on PS4. So they did. So since that worked out so well for Sony, they were already going into the next generation fully expecting to keep the PS5 around a lot longer than they initially would in past generations. But now, since they're pushing back the PlayStation 6, all of that is basically telling developers, hey, you should be targeting PS5 level hardware going forward for the foreseeable future, because the next generation might not even be that much of an upgrade, because all of the rumors we've heard have pointed to Sony going towards a console that's actually affordable versus being super high tech and having super high frame rates, super high resolutions, and all the stuff they chased with the PS5 and PS5 Pro. So when you take all of that info and combine it together and bake it for like 35 minutes at 350 degrees, the cake that comes out is amazing, and it's the Steam Machine. Going back to when it was announced, there was a not insignificant group of people who were a little bit underwhelmed with the spec sheet of the Steam Machine because it was basically a PS5 on paper. Like, I know there's a margin of error that in some ways it's a little more powerful than a PS5, and in other ways it's a little less powerful than a PS5. I think it's more than fair to say that if you generalize the spec sheet of the Steam Machine, it comes out at basically the same level as a PlayStation 5, which in gamer terms basically means it's going to be very good for 1080p, 60 FPS, no matter what game you throw at it. And then if you throw in upscaling like FSR4 or FSR3, it's going to be able to push higher resolutions and get the same-ish frame rate. Like if you play an Unreal Engine 5 game like Chronos The New Dawn or Silent Hill F, or even, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid Delta, you're probably going to be able to play at higher settings, but then you'll have to push down the FPS to 30 or 40. But generally speaking, it's going to be in the same performance range as the PlayStation 5. And we didn't even talk about the fact that that level of performance is better than what 70% of the people on Steam are already using. So for most of the people on Steam, if they do decide to pick up a Steam Machine, it's going to be a pretty big upgrade for them no matter what. It really is the answer to every problem that the PC ecosystem is facing right now. All these components are going up. Yes, that will drive up the price of the Steam Machine, but it's relative to everything else. Sony's RAM stockpile that they had because they read the tea leaves and saw that price increases were coming on RAM, it won't last forever. So while the PS5 is right now sitting at a price that is higher than it initially launched at, which was $500 for the disk drive model model and $400 for the disk drive list. Now I'm pretty sure it's at least $550 for the disk drive model, which is kind of crazy because that console is 5 years old. So for anyone who's already in the PS5 ecosystem that might be thinking about getting into PC gaming, I mean, if it's around the same price as a PS5, that's an easy sell. Same thing goes for the Switch 2. It's relatively cheap compared to the PS5 by almost $100, depending on which model you compare it to. But when you compare it to the price that the Steam Machine is supposedly targeting, it also looks like a great and easy way into the PC ecosystem. And for people who are looking at building a PC, if you're looking at the spec sheet that includes like a 9800 X3D and a 5080 or above, I think you will be able to get those cards and those CPUs, but like you're in a different price bracket than Valve is targeting. And honestly, the only scenario which I could see the Steam Machine being a good purchase for them is if they already have a PC at their desk and want something simple they can plug into their TV, so it covers them in that lane, but it was never really targeting them in the first place. It's targeting the vast majority of Steam users who, like I already mentioned, this would be a massive upgrade for. And it is pretty wild that now, just a few months after it was announced, the Steam Machine looks like it's pretty future-proofed going forward, because if developers have to target the PS5 longer than they initially wanted to, they're going to have to continue targeting the exact spec level of the Steam Machine, which means if a game is launching and running well on PS5, you could reliably expect it to look and run really well on the Steam Machine. And I expect that to continue a lot longer than probably even Valve initially thought it would back when they announced this thing in the first place, or even started producing it in their factory. And finally, I think this thing's going to be a pretty damn good gateway drug for PC gaming. If you buy a Steam Machine and fall in love with PC gaming and go build a better gaming PC, that doesn't hurt Valve at all, because if you build another gaming PC, you're either going to install SteamOS on it and use the Steam store to buy all your games, or you're going to install Windows on it. And while you might have Game Pass, you're probably at some point, if you ever build a PC after buying a Steam Machine in the future, going to buy a game on Steam, which in turn gives Valve either a 30% cut or a 100% cut if you buy one of Valve's games. So if you look at the situation from a top level, while I was already really excited for the Steam Machine, now looking at it and looking how expensive everything else is getting and what performance specs developers are going to have to target for the next few years, the Steam Machine is positioned perfectly to be a huge success. And now I already thought it was going to be successful, but I think it might be even more successful than I initially thought. So yeah, that about wraps up the main topic, but let's get into the quick roundup at the end of the video. What Resident Evil game should you play before Requiem? Of course, you got to start with Resident Evil 2, either the original, which I really love, or the remake, which I also really love. I think if you looked at the entire Resident Evil series, Resident Evil 2 Remake is easily considered the best of them all. Not my favorite, but if I had to objectively rank them, it's impossible not to put it at the top. If you want to play the original, which I highly recommend you do at some point regardless, you can get it through GOG in a collection with the first game, the second game, and the third game. If you use Heroic Launcher, it's dead simple to just log into GOG, download the game, and then click the Add to Steam button. It adds it to Steam with all the art, and it just launches and boots perfectly, so that's awesome. For the remake, you got to put in about the same amount of work. You just download it through Steam, and then go to Properties, go to Betas, and get the non-ray tracing version. Even if you turn ray tracing off in the ray tracing build, it runs worse and it stutters more. So like go for that version that's under the betas. It's not actually a beta, it's the old version of the game before they upgraded it. And that one, you can basically max it out, get 40 or 45 FPS, or if you leave it at the default original settings, you can get 60 FPS all day long. This is just such a good game. So like, I don't know which one I would play. I really like the original, but like, if you want to see the Leon that you're getting in Requiem, you should probably play the remake. The next game you should play is Resident Evil 4. This was the best until Resident Evil 2 Remake came out. It's my favorite game of all time. This one's similar. You can play the original, you'll get an excellent experience. It still holds up really well. It has a lot more humor than the remake does, but the remake is kind of like a perfect remake. I have zero complaints about it, and it moves some things around in the story that I think make it better. And if you're going to play Resident Evil Requiem, I would go with the remake because again, it's the same Leon. It's like the remake Leon going from 2 to 4, and it runs really well on the Steam Deck at basically medium settings. The only issue that you can't get around is that when you look down the scope of any rifle, it doubles the image. So like you get half the FPS because it's rendering the game twice. One way to get around this for 99% of the game is to just take the scope off of any rifle, which you can do. But then eventually you'll fight these enemies called regenerators that require a thermal scope to see where to shoot them. That's one level of the game where you're going to see below 30 FPS FPS, but I would lock this one at 30. This is where things get a little bit tricky because the story of Resident Evil 6 is technically canon for Resident Evil 9 and mostly canon to the remake Leon, but it's not the remake Leon, but it's still new enough where it doesn't really cause any cognitive dissonance. I just beat this game for the first time. I really enjoyed it. I think you're just fine if you play the Leon campaign and then jump straight into Ada. Playing as Chris and Jake is cool if you want extra context for the story. The story itself, not that great if we're being real. It's very like confusing and weird. The most coherent part of the story is Leon's campaign, so you can run through that in like 6 hours and I think it's worth it. Just take some time to learn the combat and the mercenaries mode and you'll be fine. I think this game is worth playing, but on this list, it is dramatically the worst one, but still a really fun game nonetheless. So if you really fall in love with those games and fly through them in a weekend, which, you know, is doable, but a little tough since Resident Evil 4 is like a 20-hour game and you want more before Requiem comes out, I would recommend playing 7 and Village. I don't know how relevant they're going to be to Requiem, but like they're part of the same trilogy, so I'm assuming the mold or something will come from 7 and 8 and go into 9. But on top of that, they're just really good games overall. I don't like 8 as much as 7. I think 7 is my second favorite Resident Evil after 4, and then 2 Remake is tied with it, but Village is still really good and worth playing through. And if you go through getting your head around the tank controls and you want the backstory on Grace Ashcroft, you can play Resident Evil Outbreak Files 1 and 2. You can get the story on her mom, but like they haven't been clear if that's canon or not. And while Outbreak File 1 and 2 are really fun, they're not like traditional Resident Evils because they were built to be multiplayer games where you play scenarios. They're kind of like Dead by Daylight or the Outlast Trials. So like a lot of people are suggesting you play those, but I would just look up the backstory lore on Wikipedia and spend your time on 7 or 8 instead. But yeah, guys, that about covers it for today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.